Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 288, Belal Muhammad defeated Gilbert Burns to extend his win streak to 9 straight, and now he's become the #1 contender in the welterweight division. But if you've been paying attention at all to the MMA community as a whole, Belal Muhammad is still not getting any respect, and we are going to discuss the list of reasons why Belal Muhammad is not getting any respect from the fan base. And we're also going to discuss one of those reasons is a very sensitive topic that a lot of people are going to get pissed off that I even talk about. But guess what? On this channel, I talk about whatever I believe, regardless of backlash. So if you guys enjoyed that type of content, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. But we're going to talk about why Belal Muhammad is so disrespected by the MMA community as a whole. We're also going to discuss about the whole Colby Covington title shot situation. And we're also going to discuss, is Colby Covington a draw? Because I believe you can put together a pay-per-view main event with Belal Muhammad that will sell more pay-per-views than Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington, which is supposedly going to be the next welterweight title fight. So first off, starting off with Belal Muhammad's win streak. Belal Muhammad, we're going to look at his win streak more in detail in a little bit. He's on a 9-fight win streak. And I know you can say the Leon Edwards no contest sandwiched in there. That's excluded. That doesn't end a win streak. I know technically, if you really want to get exactly down to the definition, technically he has a no contest in there. He's on a 9-fight win streak. His last 4 fights have been all against top 15 ranked competition, and he's been pretty active. He fought in May of this year. He just fought Gilbert Burns on short notice. He fought Sean Brady back in October. He fought Vicente Luque in April of last year. We're going to go through his resume more in depth later in the video, but he's been active. He's beating quality opponents, but yet somehow Belal Muhammad is still getting no respect. You look at his MMA resume as a whole, 23-3. He has 3 losses in the UFC, but his last loss was all the way back in 2019, 4 years ago. And he stepped in on short notice. He fought Gilbert Burns. And Gilbert Burns, I know he took the fight on short notice as well, but he just had a fight with Jorge Masvidal. He just had a training camp. He was in shape. Belal Muhammad was coming off the couch, had an ankle injury, which he confirmed after the fight, and he won the fight. And we're going to talk about that fight more in depth in a little bit. But still, Belal Muhammad, even with all the accolades that I just discussed, there is still some common, tropes constantly trotted out there about Belal Muhammad, saying that he's boring, saying they don't want to watch him fight, saying that he doesn't deserve a title shot. And what are the reasons that the MMA community and the MMA fan base as a whole, a large majority of them, do not like Belal Muhammad? And the first reason for that is very obvious. It's that Belal Muhammad is outspoken, and he's also a bit cringy as well. And people really don't like that. We talk about it with other fighters like Israel Adesanya. And I think at some point in time, I don't remember exactly when it was. It's hard to pin down an exact date for this. Someone told Belal Muhammad to start speaking up. They're like, look, you're winning fights. You're not getting any attention. Start speaking up. And Belal Muhammad, I don't think it's worked for him in terms of winning over the fan base. He just has gotten himself more hated and gotten into more hot water by being outspoken. And also he just, in a comparison to Colby Covington, he's just cringy. Both of those guys are cringy. And I think a large portion of the fan base do not like Belal Muhammad because they don't like him being outspoken and they don't like the cringiness of his trash talk. Now, another reason that people commonly say they dislike Belal Muhammad, and this one honestly is kind of a myth. They say, oh, Belal Muhammad is boring. I sleep through Belal Muhammad fights. You should have saw the comments about Belal Muhammad after his win over Gilbert Burns. I think this is partially true, but it's really kind of a myth, honestly. Of course, you can pick out any fights and say, oh, these fights were boring. But you go back and you look at Belal Muhammad's most recent fights. His fight with Gilbert Burns at UFC 288. If that wasn't exciting to you, you need to go watch WWE instead, okay? That was a very good fight, primarily striking, because I think a lot of people, when they look at Belal Muhammad, they look at him as a grappler, which he does have very good grappling, and he does rely on his grappling quite a bit. But I wouldn't call him a heavy grappler by any means. He's a well-rounded mixed martial artist. And against Gilbert Burns, it was primarily striking. And the performance he put on against Gilbert Burns, I thought was far more entertaining and far more impressive than the performance that Gilbert Burns put on against Jorge Masvidal a couple weeks ago at UFC 287. So that fight wasn't boring. You go back to his most recent fight before that was at UFC 280 against Sean Brady. That was a highly entertaining fight from start to finish, back and forth fight, and he TKOs Sean Brady, which we're going to talk about more in a second because there's another kind of myth about Belal Muhammad, which is also partially true as well, which is why I'm bringing it up. And then the fight before that, he had a fight with Vicente Luque. It went 5 rounds. It went to a decision. But that was a pretty entertaining fight as well. Vicente Luque moving forward, looking to land bombs on Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad taking him down, beating him up. Fight before that against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, not particularly entertaining. He just out-grappled Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Wonderboy Thompson can't defend a takedown to save his life. And after this fight, I'm pretty sure that's what made him refuse to fight anybody who's wrestled in middle school since then. He won't accept a fight with. But I understand there are some fights you can pick and choose out of Belal Muhammad's resume and say, okay, these fights have been boring. But his last 3 have been pretty exciting in my opinion. They're not, Yuri Prohaska versus Glover Teixeira, but they're pretty exciting in my opinion. Again, not the most exciting fights, but they're far from boring. Now, another thing about Belal Muhammad, the reason people don't like him is because they say, okay, he does not finish fights. And this is as true as kind of like the cringiness. It's not completely accurate, but I do understand that Belal Muhammad does win the majority of his fights by decision. He has 23 wins. He only has 5 knockouts, 1 submission. So 17 decisions in his pro MMA career. I understand that Belal Muhammad is not a finisher, but I don't believe that is a massive reason to dislike a fighter. There's plenty of fighters who have been entertaining that fight to a decision, and I just don't think that should be a primary reason for not liking a fighter, but that is true. And I want to list all the reasons that I believe that the MMA community as a whole does not give Belal Muhammad the respect he deserves. Now, there is another reason that we're going to talk about in a second. But on top of the MMA community not giving Belal Muhammad the respect that he deserves, the UFC is also not giving Belal Muhammad the respect that he deserves. Because UFC and Dana White have already guaranteed Colby Covington the next title shot, that he will be fighting Leon Edwards at some point in 2023. And what I really want to do, and I've done this in previous videos, but I want to do it again in this video, is I want to compare and contrast Belal Muhammad's resume against Colby Covington's resume, because I think it is a stark contrast. You have Belal Muhammad, who most recently is on that 9-fight win streak. His last 4 opponents, one is Gilbert Burns, who was ranked in the top 5. The other was an up-and-coming contender who was surging towards the top 5 at the time, and Sean Brady, who he stopped. The fight before that was Vicente Luque, who I don't remember exactly where he was ranked, but he was close to the top 5, maybe number 6, maybe number 7. The fight before that, Wonderboy Thompson was in the top 10. Damian Maia, I'm not sure where he was at, but Damian Maia was on the decline at that time. Not the greatest win. And then the fights before that weren't the greatest wins. But nonetheless, let's really focus on those last 4 fights that Belal Muhammad has won. You compare those to Colby Covington. Colby Covington's on a 1-fight win streak. He beat Jorge Masvidal, who just retired from MMA after losing to Gilbert Burns, lost every single round, 30-27 loss at UFC, 287 just recently. And that is Colby Covington's last win, and he hasn't fought. That was back in March of 2022. The fight before that was against Kamaru Usman, a title shot. He lost that fight. The fight before that was Tyron Woodley. He won that fight via TKO, but that was a relatively uneventful fight. It didn't look like Colby Covington was going to get a finish. And then Tyron Woodley, a rib injury happened on the ground in the 5th round. The fight was stopped. Uneventful fight. Tyron Woodley on the decline of his career. Fight before that, a title shot against Kamaru Usman in which he was TKO'd in the 5th round. Before that, he beat an aging Robbie Lawler. Dominated him, but Robbie Lawler was washed up at this point in time. Robbie Lawler is one of my favorite fighters. I don't think it's a worthless win because Robbie Lawler was still okay at that point in time back in 2019. But still not a quality win. The fight before that, and probably Colby Covington's best win, in my opinion, was against Rafael Dos Anjos. And I understand that Rafael Dos Anjos is a good fighter. He's not a true welterweight. He got beat by Kamaru Usman and countless welterweights. And this is Colby's arguably best win. This was for the interim welterweight title. And one thing I want to highlight, and we're not going to go through any more names on Colby Covington's resume because you probably wouldn't recognize half of them. But one thing I want to highlight, you look at Colby Covington's entire resume, his entire pro MMA resume, he does not have a single win over someone who is currently in the top 15 of the UFC rankings. He is 2-2 in his last 4 fights. Colby Covington's best win, and I say win sarcastically, is losing to Kamaru Usman twice. That is his best performances. And that's what people point to. Oh, well, he had close fights with Kamaru Usman. Well, that doesn't dictate you to get another title shot against Leon Edwards, especially after sitting out in witness protection for a year. So why is Colby Covington getting a title shot? I believe that Colby Covington is getting a title shot because I think Kamaru Usman was close to pulling out of UFC 286 with an injury. The UFC was panicking because the card was going to be basically non-pay-per-view worthy if Kamaru Usman pulled out. I think the week of the fight, they called up Colby Covington. They had him come in, fly into the UK, weigh in as a backup, and he was there to save the event in the event that Kamaru Usman pulled out of the fight. And because he did this, he earned some Dana White privilege. And the UFC and Dana White, in the past, as fighters have done them favors, they are willing to then reciprocate that. And I think because Colby Covington, on a drop of a hat, was ready to show up in the UK, weigh in, and potentially fight Leon Edwards on short notice, I think the UFC owes Colby Covington a favor, and that's why they're giving him a title shot. But what I don't like is Dana White refuses to come out and just straight up say that. And instead we're hearing, well, Colby Covington deserves a title shot. There is nothing in this resume. When you look over Colby Covington's resume, there's nothing to indicate that this guy deserves a title shot whatsoever. He is basically the last on the list in terms of deserving a welterweight title shot. Because you look at the rankings right now, in my opinion, Khamzat Chimaev, okay, he might not fight at 170 again. That's still up in the air. I don't know why they don't remove him from the rankings. If that is in fact the plan, Khamzat deserves a title shot more than Colby. Belal Muhammad deserves a title shot more than Colby. Gilbert Burns is now in a weird spot because he just lost to Belal Muhammad. But before that loss to Belal Muhammad, I think Gilbert deserved a shot more than Colby. Shavkat Rakhmonov deserved a shot more than Colby. So essentially, you have an endless list of fighters that deserve a title shot over Colby Covington. And I keep hearing some people trot out the same explanation over and over and over again to why Colby Covington deserves a title shot. And they keep saying, well, he's a draw. He's going to draw in pay-per-view buys. This is something that I feel like is so baseless. This is such a baseless claim. There is no evidence to support the claim that Colby Covington is some type of major star. I do agree that Colby Covington will draw in more pay-per-views than Belal Muhammad in terms of a title shot against Leon Edwards, but not substantially. We're acting like Colby Covington is some type of Conor McGregor star, some type of John Jones star. Colby Covington, when he took on Jorge Masvidal at UFC 272, that was a fight that was this grudge match. It had this great backstory, and Jorge Masvidal at the time was a bigger draw than Colby Covington. According to, you had the Sports Business Journal, and again, I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but according to them, UFC 274, which was Oliveira versus Gaethje, did the most pay-per-view buys of 2022 at that point in time, and it only did 400,000 buys. So that tells you that Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal, who was a bigger star than him, didn't do all that great. And another way I can tell you that it didn't do all that great, if it did do excellent, if it did 1 million buys, if it did 800,000 buys, Dana White and the UFC would be the first to tell you. So there's no reason to believe that Colby Covington is some massive draw. And I'm going to talk about the fight with Belal Muhammad that I think would be a bigger draw than Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington in a second. But one other thing I want to point out is Colby Covington fought Robbie Lawler back on ESPN 5. And I want to read you something from an article that I found about the ratings. This was live on free TV. I do want to put a disclaimer out there. This was during the afternoon, so there is a bit of an excuse for this. But you had Covington's UFC on ESPN 5 headliner versus Robbie Lawler the same year represented the worst performing of the first 5 UFC events on the network. While the event amassed 680,000 viewers, fellow welterweights Leon Edwards and Rafael dos Anjos comfortably surpassed it with 957,000 viewers, as did lightweights Edson Barboza and Justin Gaethje, who drew 828,000 viewers. So I know that was a while ago, that's back in 2019, but he doesn't draw on free TV. So now all of a sudden he draws in terms of pay-per-view buys when we really have no evidence of that. He's only headlined the one event without a championship on the line. And I believe Kamaru Usman is a bigger draw than Colby Covington. The reason people tuned into that pay-per-view, which didn't do crazy well, was because people thought, okay, Colby Covington may be the guy to dethrone Kamaru Usman. But we have not seen Colby Covington as some substantial, massive draw. I just believe essentially he's getting the title shot because he was willing to step in on short notice against Leon Edwards. Now, another factor in a lot of fans really not liking Belal Muhammad, and I've talked about this in other videos. I talked about it in a recent Islam Makhachev video, and I think a lot of people, gave me a lot of hate for it, but I don't care. I'll talk about whatever I want in these videos. And I believe this to be true. And I'm going to say this, and some people don't hear it correctly. I do not know to what percentage this is, but there is people that dislike Belal Muhammad because he is Muslim. I can't tell you how many times when I'm scrolling through comments on Instagram or scrolling through, tweets about Belal Muhammad on Twitter, and I see things said about his religion. I see 9/11 jokes made. I see terrorist jokes made time and time again. And there is a portion of the MMA fan base who dislike Belal Muhammad because he is Muslim. And this happens throughout the fan base. We've talked about it with Islam Makhachev. We talked about it with Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'm not saying it's the entire group that hates Belal Muhammad, but there is a percentage out there, and it is a very loud, vocal minority that consistently brings these things up and constantly makes offhanded jokes. And if you want to say that isn't true, what I want to say to you is these same people that hate Belal Muhammad and call him boring love Colby Covington. Well, I look at Colby Covington, he has nowhere near the level of impressive wins of Belal Muhammad. His fights are substantially boring outside, or boring in terms of what those people are calling boring. If they're calling Belal Muhammad's fights boring, Colby Covington's fights in comparison are boring. When you look at the Jorge Masvidal fight, you look at the Tyron Woodley fight, you look at the Robbie Lawler fight, it's primarily grappling. Now, just full disclaimer, I don't think Colby Covington's boring at all. I don't think Belal Muhammad's boring at all. But in these people's minds, who they call Belal Muhammad's fights boring, if his fights are boring, then what are Colby Covington's? And these same people that hate Belal Muhammad for his quote-unquote boring fights and his cringy personality love Colby Covington. There's only one difference there. There's only one difference I can see there, and I think it's fairly obvious. Actually, there's two differences. Belal Muhammad's actually winning fights and being active, and Colby Covington isn't. But also, there's the Muslim factor there. And I know some people are going to say, oh, Belal Muhammad said the thing about Colby Covington only getting a title shot because he was white. I think he was trolling there. But also, I don't think Belal Muhammad should have brought that up at all. I don't think that's right at all. You shouldn't be bringing up somebody else's skin color in any respect. But again, that's not the worst thing I've ever heard. Those same people who were complaining that Belal Muhammad said, oh, Colby Covington's only getting a title shot because he was white, are the same people applauding Colby Covington when he's talking down to the Brazilian fans because of their, nationality. There's the same people applauding that. These are the same fans that love Bryce Mitchell. They love Colby Covington. But for some reason, they hate Belal Muhammad. They hate Islam Makhachev. They hate Khabib Nurmagomedov. I just think it's something worth pointing out, and it is unequivocally true. And if that upsets you, you're probably one of those people. If that makes you so angry that you want to leave some paragraph comment down below, it's probably true in regards to you. So there's nothing else I can tell you in regards to that. But one other thing I do want to say in this video is people keep saying Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington getting the title shot because he's a draw. If we want to make fights purely based off of pay-per-view buys, then why don't we just strip Leon Edwards and book Colby Covington versus Belal Muhammad? Because I believe Colby Covington versus Belal Muhammad would sell more pay-per-views than Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I think Colby Covington versus Belal Muhammad, I'm going to repeat it for you, is a bigger fight in terms of pay-per-view buys than Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Also, I believe Belal Muhammad versus Khamzat Chimaev would sell more pay-per-views than Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington as well. So if you want to just make fights based off of pay-per-view buys, you want to dictate title fights because of pay-per-view buys, strip Leon of the belt. Let's make Belal versus Colby. Let's make Khamzat versus Colby. That's the fight that'd probably do the most pay-per-view buys. So why not? That's what we're doing. We're dictating title fights, not off of merit, but off what you can sell. And sometimes there is a gray area. But in this particular case, there's no gray area. Belal Muhammad deserves the title shot more than Colby Covington, but he's not getting it. But luckily, at least I believe when the UFC does Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington, I do believe Belal Muhammad will get the winner. And this is kind of where we'll end the video. I want to talk about one more thing. Colby Covington did an interview recently where he said Belal Muhammad can't sit out and wait for a title shot. He's going to have to fight again, and rightfully so. I think that is so delusional. Colby Covington sat out for over a year off a win over Jorge Masvidal, and he's getting a title shot. But yet now Belal Muhammad, he's won 9 fights straight. His last 4 fights have been against ranked guys. And you want to say, he's going to have to fight someone else? That is straight up delusional. And that's why I just think Colby Covington shouldn't even be getting the shot. And I do believe if he does get the shot and he does win the fight against Leon Edwards, I think the welterweight division is going to be ruined. He's going to hold that belt hostage. He may very well get stripped of it himself because he's going to, next thing you know, he's going to be calling out Nick Diaz or Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor trying to fight one of those guys and defend his welterweight title there. But I just think this entire welterweight division is a debacle. And I think there's so many common things thrown out there that just are baseless and flat out untrue. I wanted to make this video talking about Belal Muhammad and his, in the fact that he deserves a welterweight title shot over Colby Covington. And I wanted to discuss why the fans aren't giving him nowhere near the amount of respect his resume deserves. Let me know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.